up, everyone? Keegan Russell here with the Sports Authority Gurus podcast. I'm excited, as always, to be back on the mic again for another episode and hope to bring you some high-quality sports content like we do in all of our previous episodes. So if you are pleased with our content, at least from what you've listened to so far, please give us a shout-out on Twitter or over on Facebook. Would love to kind of hear what our fans think so far. Hit that follow and like button if you haven't done so yet. And if you are listening to our episodes on Spotify, iHeartRadio, or YouTube, leave us your comments below when you can. Leave us a great review. And, of course, subscribe to our podcast on all of those platforms so that you never miss any of the latest episode releases. All right, so if you've been following along the last few episodes, first off, thank you. I have been promising some fantasy football content, and this will be the first of several episodes centered on just that. So for this first one, this is part 1 of 2, and this first one, my hope is to provide you with some high-quality strategy and to assist you in your draft preparation for your fantasy leagues and give you some tips on how to put together a quality roster, as well as some other draft do's and don'ts. And to do all of this, I am joined by a good friend of mine, Alex Fazy. Alex, thanks for joining me today to talk some football. What's up, man?
Not too much, man. Just getting back into the life, recently married and getting situated in the old 1-bedroom apartment here, figuring out life. And then honestly, just getting excited for some football to start back up. I need something to do with my Sundays. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and we're getting real close to having a full slate of games on Sunday. So before we jump in too much with with fantasy, kind of give us and the listeners here kind of quick background on football yourself, your background with football, favorite teams, favorite players, that kind of stuff, and maybe a little bit about how much you've been playing fantasy over the years.
Yeah. So, I mean, I've been watching football since the day I can remember. Honestly, I'm from St. Louis here, but my stepdad has been taking me to Rams games since I was a little kid. He had season tickets. Got to see a lot of losers there because we were pretty bad by the time I was getting to the age of watching.
Yeah, because that would have been after the early 2000s for you.
Yeah, that was after the big runs. So honestly, even when he was taking me to games, I don't know, you can see the bad lighting, but I've been a Chiefs fan since way before I came out to Kansas. So the Chiefs are my team. Always excited to watch them. Got to watch quite a few losing seasons, and lately it's been a nice change of pace for some wins. And a little nervous for this season. I'm not going to lie, just a smidge. But I think that it'll be a more competitive season every game. So every game will be kind of a heartbeater.
Yeah, and if you guys have been with us before the podcast officially started, Alex is one of the first guys that jumped on with me to talk some Chiefs news after the Tyreek Hill trade went down, and we were going to get on and do a couple more over the summer and just never got to. So glad to have you on now. But since then, that last time we talked, what's your quick outlook on the Chiefs' new offense with what they brought in since then?
Honestly, the more that time has gone past, I'm feeling better and better every time. I mean, I like Sky Moore, and honestly, I think that Juju's best years were when he was not the number one and he was more of that flex inside guy where he was getting short, quick passes, which has been kind of the trend of the Chiefs as of last year. We've been getting blocked deep, and so Pat's had to figure out some short passing strategies, and I think Juju fits really well into that bracket. And like I said, I think Sky Moore is maybe not the star power that we had with Tyreek Hill, but I think he matches kind of evenly with how Tyreek played, and maybe we can get some good long balls. And as always, I mean, I'm a big Travis Kelce fan, so I think he's going to be as productive as always, if not more, now that Tyreek's gone.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited for it. Well, don't want to spend too much time talking Chiefs in this episode since this is fantasy football. If you join us in part 2 of this in our next episode, we will discuss some of the Chiefs' offensive players and how they factor into your fantasy drafts and if/when you should take those guys. So, fantasy football. Now, myself, I've been doing fantasy football for, I want to say 12, 13, 14 years now, somewhere in there. And it's definitely changed over the years as the league has changed and become more pass heavy. So for the purpose of this episode, when we're talking fantasy strategy, we're going to talk about the PPR leagues, which are the points per reception league. That is becoming the more common league styles versus your standard drafts. So everything we go through today is through the frame of reference of PPR leagues, and we're going to kind of focus on 10 to 12 man leagues. Once you get less than 10 man leagues, there's things kind of switch up a lot differently. The draft order is different. You've got more players available to you. 10 to 12 seems to be the average. So again, for the purpose of these episodes on fantasy football, we're going to pretend we're in a 10 to 12 man league and kind of go through all that. So first off, big difference between PPR and standard. PPR leagues favor guys that are high production, higher usage players, guys that are getting more rushing attempts, passing attempts, and receiving attempts, versus standard leagues, which you kind of have to rely on touchdowns to get really high scoring games. So points differentials are very different from standard to PPR leagues. A lot of standard leagues, you may see scores as low as in the 30s and 40s, upwards of 50s, 60s. PPR leagues, depending on how you run your league, they can jump all over the place. Each year I do a different type of PPR league. So I've been in ones where we really go super in depth to how you can score, and add different things for yardage, distance of a touchdown, all that kind of stuff. So it can be messy, but for the purpose of this PPR leagues, we want to just kind of give you guys a background on how we think you should draft for those leagues to make sure that you have the best possible team out there to win your fantasy league. Because at the end of the day, while fantasy football is fun, you want to try and win because usually most guys are going for money. So let's start with this first, and that is, when should you draft? Personally, I'm of the belief you should wait to have your draft until after the final preseason game. A lot of leagues like to draft earlier, and that's okay. I hate doing that because every year there is that one star player that gets hurt, whether it's in camp or a preseason game. And even though most starters don't see much action during the preseason, there's always the chance that someone gets cut or traded, which changes their situation. But in most cases, you get that unexpected injury. And guys, it really sucks when you are drafting in the first round, especially early on, and you go out to get that star player and now they're hurt, injured, or suspension comes down. So most recent years, some of the most notable names that's happened to, guys like Christian McCaffrey, Zeke Elliott. Last year was J.K. Dobbins getting hurt in the final preseason game. So if you can, wait till after the draft or after the preseason ends, because I know myself a couple of years ago, I think this was probably 6 years ago now, Jordy Nelson was listed as a top 5 wide receiver, and we had our draft the night he got hurt, right in the middle of the game, or right after the game. And I had not paid attention, which was my fault, but I drafted him in the second round. I was like, who the heck's not taking Jordy Nelson? He's right there.
Right.
And of course, my second pick right there was gone. So highly recommend you guys wait till after the preseason. Alex, simple question. Do you agree with that? And if so, what has been your experience drafting later rather than earlier?
Yeah. I've done a little bit of both. In high school, I would say probably a lot more of the earlier drafts, which, like you said, they come back to bite you in the butt a lot. I know specifically as of recent, one guy that I have always drafted was Michael Thomas if he was available. And as of the last 2 years, I mean, it's been like some leagues I'll still try and draft him. And of course, if I draft him early, what's happening? Twists an ankle, does something, and then somehow a twisted ankle, he's out for freaking 14 games. You know what I mean? He's out the whole season. So I do agree with that. I say draft as late as you possibly can. And I think it's important too, because the earlier you draft, the less people are talking about things. You get less notes on ESPN or whatever you're watching on. And as soon as, those preseason games start going, people will start talking, they get that stuff kind of bumping up, and you get a chance to look at some guys. Maybe you see a guy who you thought, oh, they could be a breakout rookie, but you're watching them in preseason and they're struggling. And so you can maybe be tentative to take them a little bit later on.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. That was the other thing I was going to mention, is a lot of rookies, you really don't know what their potential is unless you get to see some playing time in preseason. So again, another reason to wait later, because you're going to have, fantasy football history tells us there's going to be a rookie running back and a rookie receiver that finishes top 10. It happens pretty much every year. So waiting as long as possible just gets you more looks at those guys. Draft positioning always changes from training camp through preseason. So it's another reason why you should wait later. If you draft early, you might have a guy that falls all the way in the 5th round. Well, now he might be going in the 2nd round. So again, wait as long as possible. That's first off. So let's get into other strategy. And as we're going through this, this is a quick plug-in. I am not being paid by them to advertise for this. If anyone from them is listening at some point and wants to talk with me about it, I would love to. But I am a big proponent of the Fantasy Pros guys, the guys over at Fantasy Pros. If you go check out their website, fantasypros.com, they've got some excellent draft kit material. Very excellent software if you want to do mock drafts, whether you're doing some with all your buddies or just with whoever's out there. Highly recommend you guys check them out. I'm going to mention them a few times as we're going through stuff here. But they're the ones that I go to the most. Actually, I wasn't really familiar with them until probably middle of the season last year. Last year was one of the first years I kind of took a step back from fantasy football because I just got so tired of the crapshoot that fantasy football is. You never know what's going to happen. I'll have seasons where I'll start off 5, 6-0, then I'll lose the next six. So I'll have seasons where my guys all get hurt early. So
Yeah,
fantasy football is a crapshoot. So with that being said, let's get into strategy. But remember, at the end of the day, whatever the strategy is, the main point I want you guys to leave with is you got to be flexible and willing to adapt because any given day, football changes and teams change, players get cut, traded. But we're going to try and give you as much strategy talk as we can to help you out. So let's just dive into that. So again, PPR leagues, we're targeting players that have high production, high target shares within the offense, high usage rates. Um, we're going to spend a few minutes here talking about wide receivers versus running backs. But again, we want to go for guys that are going to be very active in the offense because each reception they get, each carry they get is going to have a bigger impact on the total score. Again, more point heavy in that area versus touchdowns. Touchdowns definitely are a huge factor, but we want guys that the ball is getting to. So, Alex, let me start with this with you, and then I'll give my take on it. When you're thinking about draft strategy and where you're targeting players, and again, a lot of this is going to depend on the draft order you have
yeah.
and how many teams are in the league. Are you one that you like to value the running backs early on? Do you like to go receiver heavy? Just
Yeah.
what is your preference there?
Yeah, I am a big running back guy at the very beginning. I think for one, the pool of actual running backs that give a good output is so much smaller than a receiver. So I will always, without question, draft a running back first round. And then from there, I kind of go with it depends, like you said, where I'm at in the draft order, but I am always looking for in the first two rounds either having a running back receiver duo or a double running back duo. Like I said, there's there's injuries, there's things like that, but as long as you have one running back that can put a good output every game that they're in, minus a bye week, you tend to just have something to look forward to every game. And so I'm a big proponent of running back first.
Yeah, I think I have to agree with you there. My views have changed over the years. It's funny in today's NFL, everything is so pass heavy that unless you're a pass catching running back, you're not as big into the offense. So to me, that makes you think, well, I got to go get receivers early because I need the best quality receivers. Well, just to your point that you said, there's already a limited number of running backs out there that are really high quality. So if you can get them early, you're helping the rest of your team because
Exactly.
there's as we go through the receiver list in our next episode, there are different tiers for sure, but there are much more receiving options that could have standout seasons than there are running backs. So again, I'm very much in on that with you too. Go running back early. Again, depends on where you're drafting. If you're top five, you're going to have your choice of the Christian McCaffreys,
Yeah.
Dalvin Cooks, and Jonathan Taylors. Again, I think it kind of depends on where you're drafting. If you're towards the lower end of the first round, maybe you start to look at receiver instead because you can get a tier 2, tier 3 running back in the next round. But you do have to have high quality running backs
Yeah.
because a lot of fantasy leagues are won or lost with your running back production.
Yeah.
And in this
Exactly.
league, again, we're targeting guys that have high production in the offense. So any running back that is a dual threat to catch balls is very important. So I'm thinking a guy like Austin Eckler. Perfect example. He's going to get plenty of pass catching options.
Oh,
Christian McCaffrey too. Again, assuming they're healthy.
yeah.
Jonathan Taylor and Derrick Henry are two that probably stand out differently from most running backs because they're
Yeah.
going to get 25 to 30 carries a game. That's just how their offense is. But outside of those two, you're really looking for guys that are going to be getting a lot of potential for receptions too.
Yeah.
So let's switch over to wide receivers for a minute. walk me through your process on receivers. Are you going for guys that are majority consistent? Are you going for guys that have a lot of high upside in that first round or two? What's
Yeah.
your process for drafting receivers?
So when I'm drafting a receiver, I'm also thinking about the QB that I want. I love to have a QB receiver combo on my team. I actually was just thinking about it when you mentioned Jordy Nelson. I can't even tell you how many years in a row I drafted Aaron Rodgers, Jordy Nelson, and it was like combined 100 points in a week.
Yeah.
And since that, I always try to look at whose quarterback is who. I mean, like I said, a good receiver is only good when you have a good quarterback that's going to be able to get the ball to you. So I typically look for a guy who is going to get kind of in that mid range of, quite a few attempts to them in a game, but also, somebody who is going to make a play, somebody who's going to get some yards after the catch, a guy who can get himself open, and just try to get as many yards as possible.
Yeah, and there's a again, like we said, there's plenty of tiers to receivers, but if you can target those guys early on that are very heavily involved, even a guy like, again, we'll get into this later too, but Travis Kelce, not a wide receiver listed as a
Right.
tight end, but he's used like a typical number one
Exactly.
wide receiver. He's going to get those 10 to 12 targets a game, and
Yeah.
he's going to catch all, if not most of them.
And that's exactly what I'm talking about when I say, if you watch him play, if he runs his route, he runs his slant route and it's broken up, he's going to find an open space and get there. So I'm looking for guys that are willing to make themselves open. Basically, that's a key factor to get some serious points.
And again, we'll get into this next episode, but just throw out a couple receivers that you just really love this year that are, if I had my choice of these guys, here's who I would lay all the money on the table for.
Yeah. I mean, I think one obvious receiver that everybody would love to have is Jamar Chase. I mean, after last season, I mean, even after everyone had started the hype train on him, it was like guys couldn't guard him. I mean, I remember sitting with my palms in on my head when the Chiefs played him, and it's like triple coverage and he's burning everybody. He's catching it, he's getting open some way or another, racking up 200-300 yards in a game. I mean, that's a guy that everybody wants to see. But then there's the guys like Juju back in his prime, which I'm hoping is the case here. I wouldn't mind giving him a shot later in the rounds. He's a guy that I would see being possibly getting 8-9 targets a game, which would be great if he's getting 10 yards per target. That's a nice little bump up, especially in a PPR league for you. Especially as he's going to be available later and later in the rounds. Guys like that.
Another wide receiver question for you. How risky do you think it is to target a receiver early that who may be the primary target and doesn't have a lot of competition, but also doesn't have the best quarterback? So I'm thinking,
Yeah.
DJ Moore with the Panthers, they've got some quarterback battles going on there. A guy like Tyreek Hill or Jalen Waddle, who's
Right.
Tua is not the best quarterback. Any of the Giants receivers. So what do you think about guys like that? Is there more risk, or do you think because they're the primary go-to guy that actually plays to their advantage?
I think it depends on the player. However, a lot of times I feel like these guys who are the primary target, it's because of a breakout season the previous year, which typically means they're going to get doubled, most games if they have a decent defense playing against them. So for me, early in the rounds, I mean, like I said, you're looking for a guy like Jamar Chase where he's been proven to be able to beat a double coverage. I'm not looking for I would not draft like say Jalen Waddle or Tyreek Hill as my first because one, I'm skeptical of Tua, and two, we've never seen them together. So I think it kind of plays into what's the chemistry look like and how does that all play out as the season goes along.
Yeah, I agree there. Okay, now let's talk. The other big thing you want to look for when you're getting these guys that are high talent, high production. One big advantage in PPR leagues is the mobile quarterbacks. So quarterbacks that are going to get those rushing yards, rushing touchdowns. Obviously this is where Lamar Jackson shines for sure. Any quarterback that has potential to get you some plays with their feet is one you want to target.
Right.
So Alex, what I want you to do, just kind of walk through decent detail here. What your thought process is on quarterbacks. One, when to take them, and how you decide to value those running quarterbacks over the guys that might throw for 2,000 more yards, 1,500
Yeah.
more yards, and more touchdowns. But what's your process there, and how do you analyze who's going to do what?
Yeah. Yeah. So I typically will wait a little bit of time to draft a quarterback. I'm not super worried about having the best quarterback off the line. Like everybody's draft, I'm sure, Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen is going to get drafted quick. And there's always some guy who drafts him in like the second or third round. And then everybody starts freaking out as like, oh God, they're drafting quarterbacks off the board. And then they start to freak out and everybody's trying to take a quarterback. I typically wait until at least the fifth round, if not the sixth round, to take a quarterback, mostly because similar to the wide receivers, there is a good amount of quarterbacks. There has to be a starting quarterback for every team. And so they are going to play the whole entire game. So it's really just dependent upon how you like to do things. But typically for me, I stick with about round 6 to start drafting a quarterback. And when I'm looking at a quarterback, I'm looking for like Keegan said, I'm looking for a guy that has a little bit of both. One guy in particular that sticks out, which will be one of the first guys off the board, is Justin Herbert. The guy's got a freaking crazy arm, and he's got a good line in front of him. So he's getting a little bit of rushing yards, things like that here and there. Similar with Josh Allen. I mean, he's like a freaking tank going up the middle. He's dang near running back when he wants to be. That's a guy, as much as I hate to say it because I'm a Chiefs fan, he's a guy who's going to get you tons of points every game, because if he can't find a guy open, he's going to make something happen. Playmakers are going to make something happen.
How about draft order and how that could impact your strategy? Let's say we're a 12-man league. Are you adapting your strategy based on if you're a top 3 pick, a middle round guy, back end? What's your thoughts there? And where is your favorite spot to draft within that order?
Yeah. So I really like to be in the middle, actually. I like to have kind of an even time every single round. I feel like whenever I've been the first overall, it's like, great, my first couple picks are awesome, but then every other pick after that, it's like, dang, I'm getting the last guy on that row. Dang, I'm getting the last guy on that row. So if I had my choice, I personally like to be towards the middle of the draft line, just so that for the strategy standpoint of going through a draft, I don't have to worry about, okay, all the guys in this little sector, this tier are going to get picked and I'm going to have to pick the worst one here. It's kind of like, maybe I'll get middle of the line, but maybe I can get lucky on a good guy, type of thing. And for quarterbacks especially, I don't think that necessarily that changes my strategy too much depending upon where I am. Like I said, I am almost always picking a quarterback in like the 6th round, maybe the 5th if more than 3 or 4 quarterbacks are getting taken off the board quick. But it really just depends on who else is in your draft and how they're picking. I mean, there's sometimes where I'll have a draft and it's like literally the 2nd round, Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, and Justin Herbert are getting picked, and then everybody's like, "Whoa, what are we doing?"
Let's follow the run. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that makes drafting so difficult. You could have the most in-depth, high-quality strategy, but unless you know the guys that you're drafting with really well, that whole strategy could go up in flames as soon as there's a
exactly.
position run. And it is inevitable to happen in every draft. There's going to be a position run. There's always that guy who's like, I want to get just out ahead of it. And that's the hope, is that you get just ahead of it. But you're in the 3rd round and there's 3 quarterbacks going. You're like, what the heck are people doing? Well, maybe, you know what? I might go ahead and get my quarterback now. Guys, in
Right.
PPR leagues, unless you're getting one of those top 2 or 3, most everyone else from 4 through 15 on average is going to be fairly similar. So
Yeah.
don't go crazy when you see those position runs, because during those position runs, there's typically other running backs and receivers that are better suited to
Exactly.
pick up a spot. So be on the lookout for that. But draft position definitely plays a big factor. I've drafted all over from early to late. And I think honestly, I hate drafting early. You do get your pick of the best of the best. Um, but it is a little bit more difficult to provide a depth to your team. Sometimes you get top heavy, but then, by later rounds, your third or fourth receiver you're having to put in your starting lineup is terrible. Or it's a running back who's really an RB2 and may or may not. You're dependent on a touchdown from him. So drafting early is sometimes frustrating. Drafting late can also be frustrating too because you might miss guys and have to
Yeah.
take what's left. Middle is always that sweet spot, that 4 to 7.
Yeah.
But I have seen a lot of leagues where the guy who drafts, the final pick, because he gets to start the next round, he's actually ended up having some of the better teams because he gets his
Yeah.
his pick. Those bookend ones, those are always interesting because sometimes you have to reach or settle on a guy based on that because if I'm drafting first overall and I'm in round 4, well, I've got another 10 to 20 picks until it's my turn again.
Right.
So I might have to take a guy I really like two
Yeah.
rounds too early because he might not be there on the swing. So, and again, we'll get into that as we talk about some of our draft tips, but draft position overall can really impact how you go about things. Big thing there is just, stick to your strategy, stick to your board as best you can, but
Yeah.
and don't freak out when runs start going. But get to know the guys you're drafting with. If you're in a league where guys, no matter how much strategy you throw at them, they're like, I'm taking my quarterback early. Well, use that to your advantage. If you know the guys coming up after you are targeting certain players that they just love and aren't willing to sacrifice, use that to your advantage and make your team the best you can.
Exactly.
Next thing with that draft positioning, you really got to do some research on the guys in the draft. I highly recommend having a queue of players, 3 to 4 players every round that you're targeting. Just because you can't get that guy every single round, so that's definitely important. Which
Yep.
again, that's why I like Fantasy Pros. They've got multiple ways you can organize your list. You can go top overall draft, average draft position. You can mix it up by player position. Definitely spend the time doing your research. And then once you've done a lot of your research, go out and try some mock drafts, try different strategies. Don't just do the same plan over and over. You're never going to really learn what strategy works the best until you try some of them in your mock drafts. And then as you're doing those mock drafts, find what those trends are. Any other big picture strategy things you want to touch on before we get into some of our do's and don'ts?
No, I think we pretty much covered most things I was thinking about.
Okay, well then let's just jump into. I've got a list of 8, and these are
Okay.
not, these are just 8 things I thought of that are helpful tips to keep in mind during your drafts. First one I want to throw out there is do not reach too early, and I'm specifically talking quarterbacks, tight ends, defenses, kickers. Just because you want the best player overall at that position doesn't mean you should always take him early.
Yeah.
Too many guys sacrifice a quality team by taking at quarterback in round 2, 3, or 4 when they could have got somebody who maybe averages 3 or 4 points less
Yeah.
6 rounds later and then take a higher quality receiver. Same thing goes for tight ends. Again, unless you're looking at like Travis Kelce, Kyle Pitts, or maybe a Mark Andrews, don't go reach on a tight end just because you don't have that position filled or you're worried you're going to get tight end number 9. Again, PPR leagues, it's all about the receivers and running backs, and that's where you need to focus the most on. And of course, do not be the idiot that takes the kicker early. If you are taking a
Yeah.
kicker earlier than the last round, you're missing out on better depth positions for
Yeah.
sure.
I go as far as I never pick a defense or a kicker until the last 2 rounds because defense and kickers, the waiver wires are your friend. I am of the belief, and I do this in every draft that I do. I mean, there is no kicker or no defense that is going to make or break your team. There's always going to be an off day for a defense, and there's always going to be days that either a kicker doesn't even get to kick because that team is not getting to the hash mark, or just is having an off day and is missing.
Yeah.
I will trade out kickers and defenses weekly if I need to off the waivers. I'll switch and swap as much as I want because those two things are like kind of a weekly basis of what's the matchup looking like, who are you doing, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Point number 2, value high ceiling and high consistency in the early rounds. This is where you need to get your guy who's going to be an anchor to your team and carry you deep into the playoffs. Yes, you want to find guys with a good potential and might have high risk, high upside, but you really need to get the guys that are like we talked about, that are high percentage in the offense, running backs that are getting 30+% of the carries, receivers that are out there all 3-4 downs that are taking majority of the looks. Value that high in those early rounds, and especially guys that are consistent. If you can get that guy who's going to get you a touchdown every week or 10 to 12 receptions every week, that is key early on. Don't just take a player because he's been good before. Take a guy who's going to keep having that high ceiling in those early rounds.
Right.
Number 3, don't get caught up on bye weeks. I've been one who does this a lot where I'm like, all right, I've got 2 receivers with bye week 8. Well, my next receiver can't have bye week 8. And then I maybe draft someone who's less skilled. Go ahead and get the guys that are good and are available. Bye weeks work themselves out later with the waiver wire.
Use them as trades.
There you go. Use them as trade candidates. Draft that high potential, because you don't want to. Everyone's going to have a bad week in fantasy football, and it's usually the week where you have the most guys on bye, and that's okay. Don't sacrifice a high quality team just because you want to avoid bye weeks.
Yeah.
Number 4, as we're working into the middle part of the draft, look for guys that have high potential. So these are your guys that might have a little bit more risk to them, but a little bit higher upside. And specifically in this case, I'm talking about rookies. Like we mentioned earlier, there's always a rookie wide receiver and running back that finishes top 10 pretty much every year. Find those guys. Find that rookie who might be second in line but has potential to break out. A guy like a Sky Moore who's been sliding up draft positions right now. He's probably 3 or 4 in the depth chart, but because of his potential and his ceiling, he could get a lot of targets later in the season. So find those guys in that middle round that have high upside to be breakout stars. They may be what wins you your league.
Exactly.
Next to that, talent over need. A lot of guys get caught up in filling positions because they're empty on their team. That can also hinder you. Just because you need a tight end doesn't mean you go get a tight end when there's better wide receivers and running backs out there. So always go for talent or best player available is what you could also see that as, because like you mentioned earlier, even if you don't need another running back, your running back could get injured. He could get traded, or you could use that running back 3 you took as a trade piece for when you need something.
Exactly.
So always value talent.
Right. If you're the one who has all the good running backs, you're going to be getting, trade notifications down there all day. People are going to be like, dude, can I take this one? What do you need? And then you get your choice from their team. Hey, I need this.
And then to follow up with that, I guess you could call these both the same point, but let's kind of talk real quick. When is it a good time to reach for a player versus settling for a player, or just taking what the best player is available? In your experience, when do you think is a good time to slightly reach for somebody?
Yeah, I would say around that, like if you're going a little earlier, maybe around that 4 or 5 spot. Let's say you have, let's say you did a running back, receiver, running back. Then on the 4th spot, maybe you need another receiver, and you really like the upside on, like you said, Sky Moore. That's a time where if he's up there on the list, and a lot of guys have been taking guys, you can take a receiver if need be, or even further back if he's available in 6 or 7. That's a time where, like Keegan said, that's a time where I'd jump on a rookie, or jump on a guy who maybe just switched teams and is looking at a higher upside with a better quarterback kind of guy.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the other time I would reach on something is if you are one of those bookends of the draft order where you've got a guy that you're really, really high on, and you just know he's not going to be there 12, 15 picks later, but you've got most of your other high positions taken care of. That's another good time to reach. Typically, you'll see that with a quarterback or a 4th or 5th wide receiver that you just really like. And, he may not be your starter day one, but he's a guy you have to have on your roster. I think that's another good time to take someone. Otherwise, if you're in a spot where most of your positions are filled, or you feel good with what you've got so far, just take the next best player available. Because like we said, everybody is going to get to the end of their draft and they're going to be like, man, why did I take that guy? Or there's going to be the guy who hates their team. Take best player available and use those as trade pieces. And we'll do another episode sometime talking about how to manipulate trades to the best of your ability. But go ahead and take that best player available when there's nothing else that you truly need. Here's another fun one I get asked about. When should you stack and when should you handcuff? So stack being getting multiple guys from the same team at different positions. So usually quarterback, running back, quarterback, receiver, and then handcuffing most of the time taking the RB1 and his RB2 for that current team. So when do you think is appropriate to stack?
Stacking, I think if you've had a team where it's been established, most of the time, if I'm stacking, it's because like for instance, if you had the opportunity to stack a Travis Kelce and Patrick Mahomes, that's a duo that has represented a good output season after season. So that's a good time to stack. And in terms of draft order, I'm drafting that like maybe, like I said, 5 and 6 kind of thing.
Yep, I think stacks are good for quarterback receivers. I'm not big into handcuff guys unless you have an
No,
open
me
spot on
neither.
your roster, or it's like you've got Zeke and Tony Pollard. I think that's a good combo there. But most of the time, you're going to find somebody on the waiver wire you can take. Last big tip I have for you is don't draft based on emotional attachments to your favorite teams or players. I'm guilty of that. I do it every year. I take somebody because I like them. You do that, you're going to miss out on somebody or they're going to disappoint you. So don't do that.
Yep.
Okay, so those are some of our helpful tips to remember when you're doing your drafts. If you like those, please let us know in the comment section if you're listening to this, especially on YouTube. You can also hit us up on Facebook or Twitter and let us know what you think. We'd love to know any of the other helpful draft tips you may have so we can share them with our audience. Again, this was just part 1 of our fantasy football prep episodes. Please join us in the next episode where we will dive into the positions, share with you guys the ones we're targeting, give you some sleeper picks for each position, and several guys we are looking to avoid.
So don't forget to hit subscribe on the podcast, whether it's YouTube, Spotify, or the iHeartRadio app. We will see you guys in the next episode.